Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Evolving Grid Workshop. My name is Matt Barber, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Training at Texas RE, and I'm going to go over just a few quick housekeeping items with you before we get going with today's keynote speakers and panels. First things first, our antitrust admonition. Texas RE strictly prohibits persons participating in Texas RE activities from using their participation as a form for engaging in practices or communications that violate antitrust laws. Texas RE has approved antitrust guidelines available on its website. If you believe that antitrust laws have been violated at a Texas RE meeting, or if you have any questions about the antitrust guidelines, please contact the Texas RE General Counsel. Notice of this meeting was posted on the Texas RE website, and this meeting is being held in public. Participants should keep in mind that the listening audience may include members of the press, representatives from various governmental authorities, and industry stakeholders. In case of emergency, we have 3 exits from this room, one right next to me, one at the back of the room, and the doors that all of you came in there. Follow Texas RE personnel to our muster point that's out in the parking lot, and we'll make sure that everybody is safe there. Questions. We ask that all questions from both our in-person and virtual audience be submitted via Slido to give everybody an equal chance for questions to be answered, though I'll also give the caveat that our panels have a lot of material to discuss, so we'll get to any questions that we can, but if we're not able to today, please understand that we're trying to make sure that the discussions get to all the important points we're trying to hit. If you'd like to download today's materials, just go to Texas RE's website, and in the top menu bar, click on Training, and once you're there, open Archive Presentations, and scroll down to Evolving Grid Workshop, and you can download a PDF, and once the recording is available, that is also where we will post that. We have more upcoming events after today. Our Q3 meetings will be on September 17th. Our annual winter weatherization workshop will be on October 1st. And note that both of those events are fully virtual. And then our annual fall standard security and reliability workshop will be on November 5th, but that one will be hybrid, so there will be an in-person component for that. As always, follow us on social media for updates on all events and other happenings at Texas RE and grid reliability in general. And as everybody knows, Central Texas recently experienced a pretty devastating disaster. Those of us that grew up in Texas and spent time on, camping and on rivers like the Guadalupe, this really hit home. And for any of us in the room that are parents, it's probably about the worst thing we can imagine. So our hearts go out to, all the families that are dealing with the unspeakable loss right now. Texas RE as an organization, we'll be making a monetary donation to the Kerr County Relief Fund that supports nonprofit organizations, first responders, and local governments actively involved in response, relief, and recovery efforts in the impacted counties. So there are links on this slide, and we'll also put links to these organizations in the WebEx. If you can, please donate and help out anything for these families and communities in need. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Texas RE's Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Joseph Younger, to give our executive welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt. Good morning, everyone. As Matt mentioned, my name is Joseph Younger. I'm the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer here at Texas RE. And I want to welcome each of you in the room and all of us joining online to our special workshop focusing on the evolving grid. At the outset, I want to thank each of the panelists that are going to be presenting today for the time and effort that they spent in preparing the conversations, working with our moderators. It's a lot of time and effort. If you look at the breadth of issues that we're going to talk about today, we're all really busy. So we appreciate them contributing their time to make this event the success that it always is. I want to lead off the day by just offering some brief insights into how we came to this year's theme. Over the past several years, Texas RE's corporate goals, this is our corporate goals document, and it's available online. We've identified 3 key risk interconnection risk areas that really we've used as the touchstone to prioritize all the aspects of our program and our outreach. Those are grid transformation, extreme events resiliency and winterization, and cyber and physical security. So over the past 3 years, and 3 years ago when we held our first special workshop, we focused on winterization and resiliency. And then 2 years ago, we did the same for grid transformation. And last year, we completed that cycle by looking at cyber and physical security. So what we wanted to do this year was continue that organizational focus on these risk areas, but then look out more broadly and try and explore what the grid is going to look like in the future. And as we sat down to begin planning this workshop, it was very timely because NERC's 2024 LTRA, the Long-Term Reliability Assessment, had just come out, and it really offered what we thought was an excellent foundation upon which to build this year's workshop around the evolving grid. As many of you know, the NERC LTRA explores reliability trends, emerging issues, and potential risks for the bulk power system over a 10-year window. And in focusing on those next 10 years, the most recent LTRA offered what's really a sobering challenge in its very first paragraph, and I actually want to read it. It states, "The trends point to critical reliability challenges facing the industry, satisfying escalating energy growth, managing generator retirements, and accelerating resource and transmission development." So meeting these critical reliability challenges over the next 10 years is really going to be at the heart of what we do as an organization in Texas and what we're all going to be doing as stakeholders to accomplish our collective reliability and security mission. This is going to take partnerships at the federal and state level, between regulators and industry, and between the traditional electric industry actors and new players, new stakeholders that are entering our ecosystem. So with this challenge in mind, it's no surprise that the themes of energy growth, of new technologies, the need to accelerate and coordinate resource and transmission development inform our panels today. Our first panel will look at large loads, where they'll discuss the unique challenges presented by the rapid growth of large loads, the implications to forecasting and planning, and proposed solutions to help maintain grid reliability. Here, I want to highlight another document, our most recent reliability performance and risk assessment, which we released last month. Last year, this report identified large loads as a specific risk for the Texas interconnection for the very first time. And this year, we've increased that risk as the pace of large load integration continues to accelerate in the interconnection. I think importantly, our report also highlights and recognizes the broad range of mitigation activities that are underway at the federal and state levels, including work at both the NERC and ERCOT large load task forces to really begin addressing these issues. So I'm excited to hear from our first panel on these developments as well. The second panel today will focus on integrating emerging technologies. This panel will discuss the evolution of industry technology, resources that may become more prominent and important by 2034, and the impacts that they will potentially have on the grid. They'll explore deepening implications of the continuing transformation of the electric system from one characterized by spinning mass to one driven by power electronics, including the challenges we collectively face in that transition, but also the array of opportunities that are offered by technologies like batteries to enhance reliability. In the afternoon, we'll have a panel looking at the expanding security challenges, and they're going to explore the development of mitigation strategies, implementation of policies, and the integration of resources that can be used to enhance the cyber and physical security postures of all of our organizations. Returning to our regional risk assessment again, Texas RE identified artificial intelligence as a new regional risk area this year. That risk touches on both the potential for AI to drive increased demand for electricity, but it also highlights the potential cybersecurity implications of AI tools. And it potentially allows for their ability to allow for the faster identification of vulnerabilities and the faster exploitation of those vulnerabilities once identified. And the challenges that we're going to face in implementing that technology to defend against those threats. The interest in this area is really intense. This summer, Texas RE held a Talk with Texas workshop on AI uses in the electric industry that it was one of, if not the highest attended forum that we've ever had. So we recognize that we're all engaged in really thinking about what the AI future looks like. Of course, the panel is not just going to talk about AI, but also provide a broader look at the dynamic challenges and opportunities in the cyber and physical security space over the next 10 years. So great perspectives there. And finally, we'll close the day with transmission planning. A panel is going to discuss the challenges and opportunities in meeting ERCOT's growing transmission planning needs and the efforts that are already underway to really create the grid that we'll need by 2034. In many ways, I think this panel brings all the other topics we're addressing together. Simply put, this is one of the key ways that we're going to solve all the challenges we're talking about of increasing demand and increasingly dispersed generation. The new 765 kV backbone to serve the Permian Basin represents a new phase in our regional infrastructure to meet these challenges. So I think it's a wonderful way to end the day and explore those topics. Given that this workshop is rooted in the NERC long-term reliability assessment, we're so pleased to have Jim Robb, NERC CEO, here in the morning as our keynote speaker. Jim Albright, our CEO, will give you a full introduction in a minute, but I want to thank Jim Robb for being here today first. I'm also excited to welcome our afternoon keynote speaker, Professor Michael E. Weber, and thank him for taking the time to be a part of this workshop and provide us with his incredible expertise on these emerging issues. So I think we have a great event ahead of today. I'm already in the way of it, so I need to get off the stage. But I want to thank Matt Barber, our communications manager, for organizing the logistics, and our staff, Aaron Quigley, David Penny, Mark Henry, and Devin Kitchens for coordinating the 4 panels. And finally, the team for all their work in planning this event. With that, I'll turn it over to our President and CEO, Jim Albright, to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day.
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for all the attendees, both here in person and online. We really appreciate y'all coming to this workshop. And I want to echo what Joseph just said. I want to thank the team. There's a lot of work that goes into putting one of these on. They've done this, I think this is our 4th one now over the last few years in this theme that we're using, and we've really found a lot of benefit to having these kind of panel discussions and bringing a lot of good people together and having good conversations. So hopefully this one will be hit home just like the last few have, but I really want to thank them for all the work that they do, because it takes a lot to do all of this. I have the honor of introducing both keynote speakers today. But first off is the NERC President and CEO, Jim Robb. I've known Jim for over 10 years now, and I've gotten to work with him in different roles. And currently, we are both CEOs, but I've seen a lot of growth in the organization, in NERC, and the ERO overall since Jim's taken over. And obviously, he hasn't been there for 10 years, but he was at WEC previously to NERC. And I feel very fortunate to be able to call him a friend. So I'm glad that he's here today. While he and I are both very passionate about electric reliability, we're also very passionate about baseball. My diehard Houston Astros fan, and his allegiance to the Boston Red Sox sometimes provides us fodder to get at each other. But it's all in fun. And in case you're wondering, Jim, I'm just about over Alex Bregman signing with the Boston Red Sox, but only because the Astros are in first place currently. All kidding aside, Jim leads the ERO, which is comprised of obviously NERC and the 6 regions, Texas RE being one of the 6 regions. We're very fortunate and proud to work with Jim under his leadership at NERC. We've done a lot of good work over the last 6 to 7 years now. He's responsible for key programs, including those that focus on development of mandatory NERC reliability standards, the compliance monitoring and enforcement program, situational awareness and event analysis, reliability assessments and forecasting, and obviously cyber and physical security. Jim also oversees the performance of the EISAC, the Electric Information Sharing Analysis Center. Those of you who don't know who the EISAC is, I suggest that you learn who the EISAC is. He also works with other key government partnerships. He regularly testifies before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and obviously some congressional committees also. He's a proud Purdue Boilermaker, and he's also earned a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Jim, I know you have many commitments. We were just together in another state together. So I personally thank you for being here, and I look forward to listening to your message.
Good deal. Thanks, Jim. Joseph and Matt for inviting me to be here. Do I need to do anything to get this started, or just get, there we go. All right. So I do appreciate the chance to be here. It's been a couple years since I've been down to TRE, and I'm happy to say I found my way into the building the first time this time. Last time I had to bang on a door to get someone to let me in. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the broader national context on reliability, because there's really going to be very little I can tell you about Texas that you don't already know. But hopefully it'll kind of put some of the issues that the state's facing here in a broader context. Now, I'll kind of talk through the things that we kind of advocate for when we get a chance to talk to FERC, DOE, and the administration around issues related to reliability. I should say that Jim and I both co-chair the what we call the executive committee of the ERO, which is the myself and the 6 regional entity leadership, and both of us being named Jim sometimes creates issues. So if there's ever a problem, just remember that I'm Handsome Jim, and that'll clarify everything up. That's correct, right, Jim? Yeah. Okay, and I've also, as many of you who have heard me speak before know, I can get a little wound up, so I've given Joseph, Matt, and Jim the opportunity to just kind of kick me off the stage when the time comes. So that's all premeditated. So let me talk a little bit about the risk environment that the sector's facing. And the way I've described this, and the way I've been quoted on this, is that it's really a hyper-complex risk environment. And I describe it as hyper-complex because change is happening on multiple dimensions and happening very, very fast. And while this industry has probably been in some form of evolution since, Thomas Edison and so forth started the development of distributed electricity systems, we're at a real inflection point. Joseph's talked a little bit about our LTRAs, and one of the things that I've been telling the new administration is that we've been doing those for about 50 years. And they are usually one of the most dull as dirt reports that we would provide. They'd be a great compendium of statistics, but they just kind of said, hey, everything's kind of okay. That changed in 2018. In 2018 is when it was the first time our LTRA showed a measurable and material risk of unserved energy in the plans that the utilities had. And then 2 years later, August 2020, that unfortunately kind of manifested itself in California during a heat wave. And Cal ISO had 2 days where they had to interrupt service to about 800,000 customers because they just didn't have enough juice to distribute. And since 2018, every year we've done that report, we've seen more and more areas in the country get color-coded, translated into the maps that everyone's seen. But what started out as kind of a Southern California issue has really become a national issue, and it's driven by a number of things. 4 of which are on this slide. The first one, which is occupying a tremendous amount of attention right now, is resource adequacy. And that's driven by, and the concerns are driven by 4 or 5 major trends. The first one is over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen an extraordinary number of retirements, that have either happened or are planned to happen in the very near future. And the plants that are retiring, of course, are older plants, mostly coal, older gas, oil, nuclear facilities. And they're being replaced by inverter-based generation for the most part, wind and solar, with very, very different characteristics. Everyone kind of understands the variability issues around wind, solar production, and the fact that you don't have secure fuel, so you got to kind of plan around the uncertainties around fuel supply. But also the way they integrate onto the grid is very, very different, right? Joseph mentioned power electronics, and that's really the issue, right? The traditional generation that's leaving, creates electricity the old-fashioned way, right? It boils water, it makes something spin. And when that happens, you get kilowatt hours, but you also get voltage and frequency response and the ability to control that within very, very tight parameters. We don't have that yet with inverter-based generation, and so that in and of itself creates a real reliability challenge as those resources continue to grow. The other issue associated with retirements, particularly the retirement of the coal fleet, is that it's put much more pressure and visibility on natural gas generation, particularly in the winter. And one of the things that's exposed is that while natural gas tends to be a tremendous fuel, 360 days a year in terms of its ability to provide reliable fuel for power generation, with the cold systems that we've seen and the priority of the gas system to always kind of serve its firm load customers, which are typically the LDC, home residential heating and so forth, we're seeing cracks in the reliability of the gas system as it relates to power generation during those extreme conditions. We never really saw that before because there was so much depth in the generation fleet, but now that's really exposed and is a topic of real concern. We're getting more and more distributed resources coming on the grid, whether it's rooftop or small scale generation, mostly inverter-based, connecting onto the distribution system. So we have issues around kind of the visibility and performance of those as it relates to bulk power system reliability. And then the issue of the day, right, is load growth. The electric industry really hasn't seen any material peak load growth for the last 10 to 15 years because it's been so good at deploying energy efficiency programs, natural appliance turnover and stuff like that. But now with the advent of kind of reindustrialization priorities from the federal government, the growth in data center demand to support technology, not just AI, but AI is the technology of the moment. Right, we're seeing a tremendous change in the growth characteristics, which exacerbates every other issue that we have to deal with. So that's a real set of challenges around keeping the resources consistent with the growth aspirations that the country has. And I would say in my conversations with the White House, DOE, and at FERC, the data center growth and in particularly data center growth in support of AI is absolutely viewed in Washington as an existential issue for the country, right? They would sit back and say, if we lose the race to support AI to one of our adversaries, particularly one in Asia, right, that would be a serious loss to the country, right? So they are laser focused on making sure that we have the ability to support that growth. I touched on extreme weather complexities. You're no strangers to these in Texas, but the weather systems that we're seeing, and none of us are climatologists or anything like that, nor are we going to describe what's driving this. But it's very clear empirically that we're seeing very, very different weather systems than what we've seen in the past. And they're extreme, but not, and people hear extreme, they think infrequent, but obviously not. We've had 5 major storms in the last 15 years, winter storms in the last 15 years that resulted in unplanned load shedding. We've had significant heat domes across the U.S. over the last 5 or 6 years that are just things different than what we've seen in the past and coming more frequently. And we describe these as broader, deeper, longer. Broader in terms of area of the continent being impacted, deeper in terms of temperatures, right? Either much colder than normal in the winter, hotter than normal in the summer, and lasting longer. And the one that I kind of use as the poster child here was that heat dome that sat over the lower third of the continent, I think it was a couple summers ago, where I think it lasted about 3 months. And we saw triple-digit temperatures in places like Houston and so forth that don't normally get that hot. Because of the humidity. So a very, very different planning environment, and our typical planning construct of looking backwards to see what the future might look like isn't very helpful right now. So you got to kind of sort through what all that means. Energy and environmental policy creating a bunch of issues for us on this front. Certainly in certain areas, the focus on electrification, driven by climate change priorities. Driving growth in the sector, whether it's transportation, space heating in buildings and so forth, banning natural gas, which has happened in some jurisdictions. What people don't realize is that, you guys probably do, but not everybody realizes, that we use tons more energy heating than we do cooling. On a typical winter day, an LDC may send out 3 times as many BTUs as an electric utility will on a hot day in August. And so if you think about trying to space heat with electricity across the country, that's a tremendous amount of growth. The amount of growth associated with transportation, energy consumed in transportation is enormous, probably 3 times the size of the electric grid we have today. So all of these policies, while they might be thoughtful and aspirational and so forth, the real life consequences of them are pretty extraordinary. Electricity is only about 20% of end use energy consumption. The rest being largely petroleum products. So trying to displace those with electricity, one, creates a massive fuel issue, but also a massive infrastructure issue. Obviously a lot of the EPA's actions around emissions and emissions regulations, particularly carbon, have been problematic for the sector to figure out how to deal with, given the fossil fuel intensive nature of the sector we have today, which continues despite the extraordinary amount of investment that we've had in renewable technology. And then siting and permitting, right? The ability to get infrastructure built is also a problem. If you think about the time frames on which the industry evolves, so load, like a large load can be developed in 2 to 3 years. We'll hear some more about that, I'm sure, on the next panel. It takes, 5 to 10 years, right, to get a decent sized power plant built and sited. And the last major transmission line, interstate transmission line that got built, took 17 years between Arizona and New Mexico. So our time frames are just out of whack. We can grow the sector and grow demand much faster than we can get the infrastructure built to deal with it. And we're going to have to confront that issue and figure out how to speed up the development of infrastructure. And then, as Jim mentioned, we do a lot of work with the EISAC and on cybersecurity. And the only way I can talk about the security environment, as I just referred to it, it's just a toxic soup of bad stuff. And there's nothing good when you dig into it. Our dependence on software, much of which we don't know where it was actually originally coded, is extraordinary. And so the vulnerabilities we have to software pollution and software-based attacks through the supply chain, understanding, because so much of the stuff we put on the grid right now has intelligence built into it through software, and we don't often know where that software has come from. The rise of ransomware gangs, in addition to the threats from the big 4 adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they also sponsor criminal gangs that are incredibly capable. And it's not just them, right? It's the punks, thugs, and crooks and kids in somebody's basement, right? All create an extraordinary risk for the system. And then over the last several years, particularly in the US, with the rise of domestic violent extremists, we see lots of activity aimed at disrupting the physical grid itself. Think about the attacks that occurred in Moore County, North Carolina, a couple years ago. Very sophisticated. Now, whether they knew what they were doing or not, we don't know, because there hasn't been an arrest in that attack yet. But they managed to take out 2 substations, which then corrupted an entire loop and interrupted service to 50,000 customers. We've seen similar things in the Northwest, particularly in Idaho, Seattle, Tacoma, Christmas Eve a couple years ago. So we've seen a step change increase in physical attacks on the grid, and it's not just drunk hunters out shooting transformers, right? These are much more sophisticated than what we've seen in the past. So that's kind of the risk environment, and if you think about what that means from a reliability risk perspective, there are sort of 5 things that are really kind of weighing on me from my perspective. The first one is that most of the trends that we have, and this is really driven a lot by our use of markets and so forth, is really concentrating risk in a number of variables that we've got to be thoughtful about. So with the shift to renewables, and particularly the inverter-based integrations, that would include batteries as well. In addition to kind of all the random failures that would occur in equipment out on the grid that we're very good at planning for, we now really have to start thinking about common mode failures, right? So whether it's one of these minor disturbances that causes a bunch of inverters to trip offline, a widespread wind drought, or solar drought, right? There are things that now affect large amounts of generation, not just individual units. So all of our stochastic thinking around planning needs to kind of adjust to accommodate that. We're also losing fuel diversity. When natural gas became really cheap in the 90s, the advent of combined cycle technology, everybody built gas plants because they were the cheapest ones to build. So now we're at the point where we got about 45% of our generation fleet is natural gas dependent. Great on a number of dimensions, but we now have a real exposure to the natural gas sector. The issues around software, right? And the desire to move more software applications into the cloud, again, creates a systemic issue around, if something happens, think about what happened with CrowdStrike a couple years ago. So if everybody had their EMS systems, a common EMS system in the cloud, because everyone wants to get the best that's available, and then there's a problem with it, right? We're deep in the soup. So maintaining diversity is a big deal, and this also gets to the issue around kind of grid enhancing technologies. I remember I read an article about 2 years ago where somebody who should know better wrote, geez, if we just deployed advanced conductor across all of our transmission right-of-ways, we'd solve all of our transmission issues. Said, yeah, but we'd also create a tremendous amount of risk in having so much capacity on certain corridors. So we always got to be maintaining that balance between how do we get the most efficiency out of the systems that we have, but also maintain diversity, because diversity is always reliability's friend. We are starting to get very, very concerned about the loss of key reliability services, inertia and frequency response. As we lose traditional spinning mass generation, we may eventually be able to replace a lot of that with battery and inverter-based generation, but we're not able to do that yet at the kind of scale that we need to be able to do that. So that's an issue for us. Ensuring that we have enough reactive power and voltage support, right? One of the big issues in the Iberian outage that occurred in Spain earlier this year was their inability to manage reactive power. At least that is the kind of the current theory of the case. And recognizing that we're moving to a system that has less inherent dispatchability, right? And how we deal with that as we have more and more less secure in the moment fuel resources. I think everyone's struggling with what the right level of investment is to harden and build resilience into the grid, deal with extreme weather, figure out how to diversify ourselves so that we can minimize the impact of coordinated attacks, whether that's on physical or cyber. And then how much money should we spend on interregional transfer capability? We've ascertained that there's clearly an opportunity, but all of it comes at a certain cost as well. So I think that's a big question. And of course, an investment in this space always has to be viewed through the lens of affordability, which is also one of the issues that's coming to the forefront of policymakers' minds, is the cost of energy to the population. And on the security side, everything we're doing, which makes great sense from a productivity perspective and so forth, the application of industrial control systems, expanding IBRs, DERs, adding EV chargers, and even large loads at some point, really continues to expand the attack surface for our adversaries in the cyberspace. So we got to make sure that we've got a great set of controls and protections in cyberland around those assets. And then, as I said, right, our adversaries are the bad guys are bad, not dumb. Right, their ability to find ways to get in and attack is really very, very extraordinary. So the security needs that we're concerned about, supply chain protection, what's a cost-effective way to deal with all the with all the issues we have around software vulnerabilities in our equipment. One of the things that really got our attention was this SolarWinds event a couple years ago, 3-4 years ago now, I guess. Because that was the first time we saw somebody use a intermediary product as an attack vector for multiple assets. We call that the one-to-many solution to what otherwise was a one-on-one problem. Right, very hard to corrupt individual assets bilaterally, but if you can pollute something that's commonly used and then use that as the attack platform for all the others, that's a really scary thing to have to defend against. So all of our thinking around coordinated attack and the calculus around the likelihood of that has to change, and that gets into our issue around low impact assets. What's the kind of responsible way to protect those, recognizing that you still have to protect pens like pens and pencils like pencils, but right, these do now start to create a new vulnerability for us. So that's sort of our sense of the risk. I'm going to just pass through a few slides here and go straight to kind of our sense of what needs to happen going forward. So, and again, those other ones, they're self-explanatory, and the team here can distribute them. But here's kind of our message to the administration, right? First of all, we absolutely need to figure out a way to balance all of our policy objectives with the reliability realities of the grid and the national security objectives and concerns we have around AI. And to do that, we think there are 4 major things that need to happen. First, we really do need to figure out how to get resources onto the grid much faster than we are today, and make sure that those resources provide the complete suite of reliability characteristics we need. So it's not just kilowatt hours, we also need the voltage support, frequency response, all those things to make the grid operate stably so that we can continue to share resources across the system. It's very concerning because in the last LTRA, if you take a look at it, you'll see that the rate of new resources coming on the grid is slowing. Despite very grand plans, everyone's falling short of being able to meet those for a variety of reasons. Siting, permitting, the economics no longer make sense, what have you. Second, we're going to need a lot of infrastructure in this country, and a lot of linear infrastructure that's going to cross state lines. And whether it's electric transmission to build resilience, capture the interregional transfer capability opportunity, or to enable renewables to get from where the solar radiation is to where the load is, we're going to need a lot of transmission. And to the extent that we're going to build a lot of natural gas to be able to support the growth of the sector and build the reliability characteristics in, we're going to need gas transmission too. Those projects are very, very hard to build, site, and develop. So we really got to kind of rethink our whole infrastructure development approach. Third, to the extent that the majority of the resources that come on the grid are going to be variable in nature, which they probably are, given where the interconnection queues are. So wind and solar, we need something to balance that. We may eventually, and to balance that at scale. We may eventually be able to do a lot of this with batteries and so forth, and batteries are making a hell of a difference, in places like Texas and so forth. But, until we have long duration storage that's affordable and scalable and deployable in many areas, natural gas is going to be the balancing resource of choice. So we really got to be paying attention to natural gas and the infrastructure and the ability of the gas system to absorb all the volatility that the electric grid is creating. And then finally, and I'll tip my hat to Texas on this, we really got to move our planning construct away from thinking about capacity, which is the way we continue to do in all of our planning, and really shift our mindset to thinking about energy, 24 hours a day. Because with the change in the fuel characteristics we have, being able to serve a hot day in August doesn't really tell you about any other day of the year. And as we see more and more places shift from summer to winter peaking, the winter peak typically happens early in the morning, right? Before all the solar resources and so forth have an opportunity to do a hell of a lot for you. So we really got to start thinking through 24-hour, 8760 energy supply. And I think ERCOT and the PUC here have taken really the leadership role in the country in trying to kind of think all that through. So I'm sure I'm going to get a you're off the stage now. I might have time for a couple questions, but thanks. Again, I appreciate the chance to be here. Hope that was helpful. No, that's a good question. I assume everybody can see that. I don't need to read it, do I? No, and this comes up a lot, right? Is workforce development, and I guess I don't dwell on it because that's not something that's kind of in the NERC charter, but I think it is a real issue for the country. And one of a sidebar, one of the other things I kind of push with the administration is really the best way out of the box that we're in is to figure out how to rebuild a nuclear capability in the country. But right now we're kind of approaching that sort of as science projects, right? We're going to do some pilots and stuff like that. What we really need to do is kind of think through, how we build, not a couple nuclear reactors to figure out how they work, right? But, how are we going to build 100, over the next 10 years? And then build a supply chain and a workforce and everything else around that. So I think workforce development is absolutely a big issue. Just not one that we have a big say in. Anything else? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't have specific, I don't have numbers in my head around the growth rates particularly in China, which is extraordinary. The difference is that they have a very different approach to developing infrastructure. Pretty much whatever the Chinese Communist Party says is going to get built is going to get built. And that's one of I guess the great things about living in a democracy is that we do give people local say, but it does slow us down. So that's probably the biggest difference. And the scale of their program is extraordinary. I think I heard a statistic from Robert Bryce not too long ago that China may have built as much new coal last year as the entire U.S. grid, terawatt or something like that. So you think of the scale that they have and then the economics that flow from that. Pretty extraordinary. Again, a good question. I know FERC, we've talked with FERC a lot about the design of the markets and really looking at market design more broadly than, capacity markets and how to get, capacity compensated for, but really looking at the broader set of reliability characteristics that the grids need and making sure that where we have markets, which is now 2/3 of the country and maybe growing if, depending on how everything plays out in the West, to make sure that the markets are rewarding reliability characteristics as fulsomely as they need to. Because a lot of these things are insurance type products and our markets aren't really designed to have those. So I think it's on FERC's agenda. I don't know the specifics of where they are, but it's clearly an important issue. Yeah, again, I'm not sure I've got great visibility into this. The bigger issue that has occupied a lot of attention right now, particularly around the data centers that have been wanting to do their own kind of behind the meter generation, has been how to pay for all the ancillary infrastructure that would be required to bring that online. At the individual company level, I can't really talk. I can't talk competently about. But there's a lot of concern about how to get this all done and paid for in an equitable way. Yeah, the one interesting thing is, if you think about the last time the electric industry had a substantial amount of load growth, it was in the 50s and 60s, right? And really a lot of the infrastructure we have today was built in that period of time because of the rapid industrialization of the country after World War II. And so one of the questions I think a lot of people are thinking of is how do we harness all the growth that's going to be required to support AI and data centers and use that to kind of kickstart a broader building program for the country. I don't think we have the answer to that because the economics are a little bit different today than they were in the 50s. But we should be looking at this as an opportunity. Yeah, so a widespread solar drought. A great example of this was in Labor Day. Boy, I'm missing my years now because I'm getting old. I'm going to say Labor Day 2021, when in California, when Gavin Newsom sent out the text message that told everybody to shut off their air conditioners and their pool pumps, and because we got a problem coming tonight. That was really driven because there was an unforeseen tropical system developed off the coast of California, and that created a marine layer that they weren't anticipating, particularly that time of year in Los Angeles, and took out all the solar in Southern California. So that's what I mean by a widespread solar drought. I'll talk about one of the slides that I didn't go through that's in the pack is our wind droughts. And there was a great example of this. So across the backbone of the continent from Saskatchewan down to West Texas, there's about 60 gigawatts of wind capacity installed. And if you look at the ELCC characteristics of that wind, the grid operators would give that somewhere between 15, 25 gigawatts of capacity credit. On June 6, 2022, I think, maybe it was 2023, out of that 60 gigawatts, only 300 megawatts operated. Right, so that's a hell of a difference, even between the ELCC value and what actually operated. And these are some of the just kind of the inconvenient things around variable generation. Is you do kind of find yourself running into these situations where in any given moment, you don't know if you're going to get nameplate capacity or nothing. And in some of these cases, we see it being pretty close to zero. The good thing was that was a light load day. It was early June. But if something like that happened in August, right, we'd be talking about that in a much bigger way. Boy, I think the tariff issue is very complicated, and it's such a multifaceted issue, both in terms of what it might mean for supply chain. For development of infrastructure as well as the development of loads. So I couldn't hazard a guess on that one. Wrap that up? Okay. Well,
It's about time for us to go to break.
good deal. Well, look, thank you all very much. I appreciate the chance to visit with you all.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Joseph, for our executive welcome earlier. It's time for our first break. Please return at 10 o'clock on the dot for our first panel.
Your glass was deep and true. Your eyes could show that you